Are you a businesswoman who is finding it challenging to get your ideas across and make a point? Welcome to Speakers Who Get Results with Elizabeth Bachman, a podcast dedicated to helping women get the visibility they want, whether making a speech or talking in a meeting. Every week, get valuable lessons from Elizabeth or learn from her roundtable conversations with experts and speakers on how to make a difference, not just a point. On to the show with your host, Elizabeth Bachman.
Welcome to Speakers Who Get Results, Minette Norman and Karolin Helbig. I should say willkommen, Karolin, and willkommen, Minette. So before I get into our subject of psychological safety, let me ask you your dream interview. So for each of you, if you were to interview somebody you can't actually get to live now, who would it be? What would you ask them? And who should be listening? So Minette, why don't you start?
Yeah, this is such an interesting question. I'm going to go back more than a century to someone I would like to interview if I could. And that is Susan B. Anthony, who, for people who don't know who she was a U.S. suffragist in the 19th century. She was fighting for the woman's right to vote in the US. And the reason I would love to interview her is she faced so much resistance and she was arrested. She was constantly fighting the status quo, which I feel is a little bit my role in life. And she just did not give up. And so I would love to talk to her about what kept her going in the face of all of that resistance. How did she keep her core beliefs and keep pressing onward? And so I think she would be a dream interview.
Great.
I would love to listen, Minette.
Yes. And you know, Gertrude Stein wrote a play about her called The Mother of Us All, which Virgil Thompson, the American composer Virgil Thompson, set to music, and which I sang in college. So I was never a very good opera singer, but we did a bit of it. So the Mother of Us All. And Karolin, who would your dream interview be?
I'd like to travel back a little bit in time, and I'd love to interview Seneca. And Seneca was once a philosopher, so in ancient Rome.
Seneca.
Seneca, yes.
In America, we say Seneca with the S. Yeah, okay.
And the school of philosophers, the Stoics, they were kind of a combination of therapists and inspirational teachers, and they cared about conscious living, basically. How should we live, and what's the meaning of life, and so on. And Seneca famously said, if you really want to escape the things that harass you, what you're needing is not to be in a different place, but to be a different person.
Ooh.
And I love this quote. I mean, I love the Stoics as a group of philosophers, but I particularly this quote. And I'd love to ask Seneca, how could we apply this to modern times, to business, when leaders are busy and overwhelmed? They want to change, but how can they change attitude? How can they change themselves, basically, first of all? So I'd love to have a discussion, and I picture this not as a podcast or something, but maybe a one-on-one discussion with Seneca.
Good. Well, I'll be there. I'll come listen. Absolutely. And which actually leads me to the topic of psychological safety. And we've been talking about it since Roman times, but the definition has changed over the years. Minette, can you talk a little bit about how you met Karolin and the two of you decided you had to write a book?
Yeah, it's a really lovely story that happened in, when did we meet? Early 2021. So Karolin and I, both on different parts of the world, were, she's a leadership consultant, as am I, and we really knew about psychological safety and its importance. And we were both looking for practical material. How could we help our clients who were interested in fostering a psychologically safe work environment? And we didn't see any practical tools out there in the literature. So we signed up for a class. It was an online class based on Amy Edmondson's work. And it was the Fearless Organization Scan, learning to do assessments on the level of psychological safety. So we were both in this class. We were in a small cohort in the class together, and we clicked in a way. We just really appreciated what each other contributed. And then the way the book came to be is that Karolin heard me on a podcast. One of our fellow students interviewed me. And on the podcast, I was talking about my work on inclusive leadership and psychological safety. And I said, I'm really looking for practical materials. And I can't find anything. And in fact, in the class, we were not really learning that. We were just learning to do these assessments. So Karolin sent me an email. This is now in June of 2021. And the subject line was crazy idea. And she said, Minette, I heard you on the podcast with Rob, and your ideas and mine about leadership are very closely aligned. She sent me some of her materials, and she said, I have this idea. Because we can't find this information, what if you and I put our experience and hearts and minds together and we created a pamphlet or a brochure? And the idea was that it would be for our clients. We didn't even think this would become a book that would go out in the world. But that was how it all started. And we got on a Zoom call. I said yes immediately. We set up a Zoom call, and we can talk more about how we went forward from there. But that was how it all began.
Oh,
Yeah,
so
Minette, maybe just adding to that, I think it was helpful that we didn't aim at writing a book, that we aimed at just developing practical guideline for our clients. So aiming low and reaching higher.
So, Karolin, tell me quick. So, for the sake of everybody who's listening who has written a book or thinking about writing a joint book, what was it like to start with the practical part and then turn that into a book? Because you actually call this a playbook, which implies that it's a series of exercises that you can do.
Yeah, very much so. And it's not only just the title playbook, it is really the nature of the book is playbook. So it's meant to offer small little things you can try. And you don't have to start at the very beginning. You don't have to read until the end. You can just flip the book open, see what's there, what is resonating with you, take this and put it into action, experiment, and see how it works in your life. And I think part of the beauty of the book is the very clear structure. So we have little bits and pieces, but we have them organized in a very clear structure. So 5 key levers we can pull to increase psychological safety. And I think this was also helpful in our work together across 2 continents, that we had a very clear structure. And so we could work asynchronously and then share what we developed and comment and so on. So it was not that we had one thread of writing where only one person could continue. No, we could work simultaneously.
That's very interesting. And I know, Karolin, you're not in your own office today. So Minette, is that the book behind you?
Yeah, I've the psychological safety playbook.
Please hold it up to the camera so we get an idea. Okay. So psychological safety playbook. Great. Tell me, please, I'm going to go back to Karolin. You're teaching workshops with this material now. I mean, that was some years ago that you wrote this. What have you found in terms of using these techniques? What have you found in the reactions to people?
Yeah, I see over and over again that people are amazed how small steps, small shifts, small changes can really have big impact. So for example, just introducing one small question and make it kind of a routine in team discussions, whatever. For example, what am I missing? By the way, that's the very first move we suggest in the book. Just adding this little phrase, this little question can really change the nature of the meetings and the nature of the collaboration, of the interaction between people. I know this from, for example, a big company in Germany who run a pilot starting, because it's the first move, with this little intervention, and they were blown away by the impact.
So what sort of impact did you get? What happened?
Suddenly people voiced ideas which had been hidden so far. Suddenly people spoke up, which tended to be silent, because this question alone was making clear, we want to get your ideas, put them on the table, let's discuss. I'm interested in this idea. Usually it was only the leader talking, putting forward their idea, their suggestion, and they didn't ask for what they are not seeing.
So so Minette, this is a question that a leader can ask their team, ask the people that they're working with. Yes.
Yes, but yes, and I'll say yes.
Yes.
And,
Okay. Yes.
And
And
it's
okay.
really
That's what I wanted to hear. What if
It's
the team
very-
person, someone in the team asks it?
It's very impactful, of course, when a leader asks it, because, you know, the leader so much sets the tone for the organization. And in many cultures, we see the leader as sort of the infallible person who has all the answers. And by saying, what am I missing? They're acknowledging that they don't see everything and that other people have something really important to contribute. One of the things that we have learned in doing these workshops, and Karolin and I have both done so many of them, it's not just the leader who can ask this question and have a big impact, no matter where you sit. Just acknowledging that there are other perspectives you're interested in hearing. What am I missing? And we add on to this another possibility, which is in a group where it's so easy to get into false harmony and groupthink, that we can start to ask, okay, we've all just converged on this one solution. What are we missing? What perspectives are we not thinking of? Whose voice is not in this room? Those kinds of things are very powerful to get people to think differently. And, you know, in addition to what Karolin said about small changes, so one of the organizations that I was working with said the same thing. Someone said, you know, I thought, I was the leader of a group, I thought that people would share their thoughts, but until I started explicitly asking, they didn't. And just by adding that question, what am I missing? I started to hear from people in ways that I never did before. I had made the assumption people were speaking up and they weren't. So it's just these tiny little shifts that truly make a difference. And then, of course, being willing to listen. That's maybe the next step, is when someone does share a dissenting or divergent perspective, will I listen with an open mind? Will I listen without reacting instinctively in a defensive way? These things are important as well. But we start with just inviting other perspectives.
I have so many questions here. Okay. So making it safe for everyone in the group to speak up. I'm guessing you have to do this several times if people don't necessarily feel safe. It takes a while to build that trust. What if you're a leader who doesn't feel safe to admit that they don't know everything? Karolin, put that back to you.
Great question. And that's also one thing we emphasize throughout the book, that for leaders, in order to establish those small things, they need to really develop their self-awareness. So we say in the book, they need to become bravely self-aware. And of course, it can be for a leader who wants to make this change that it feels scary, right? They were used to having all the answers. They were hiding behind a mask of know-it-all and so on. And suddenly kind of taking off this mask, suddenly admitting we don't know it all, suddenly doing things differently is a scary thing. And first of all, leaders need to notice, oh, I'm scared. And then increasing their self-awareness and not letting this fear stop them from doing what they want to do. Just acknowledging, oh, this is new to me. This is scary. I don't know how I will be perceived. This is a true experiment with open ending. Let's see how others will react. And then do this brave step, ask this question and see how it develops. And I know the first step often is the hardest, the toughest, because it's really the unknown. And once you cultivate this a little bit more, it isn't scary anymore. And you see, oh, I get back so many great things, not only ideas from people who I've never heard from, but also relationship. I'm perceived as a human being and I can relate to my team members as human beings. And suddenly, work is not only more productive, it's much more joyful.
So, Minette, just continuing in this line for a minute, for many of us, I know for me as a leader, it was scary to admit that I didn't know. And there have been times where I didn't give enough clear information so that my team was confused. So where do we find the balance between giving people the direction that they need, because you're the leader, so you have to be giving direction, and admitting that maybe you don't know everything? There's got to be a balance in between there.
I was just going to say it is a fine balancing act that we are constantly navigating as leaders. And I led before I became an independent consultant, I led a very, very large global team. I had about 1,000 people in my organization. So I'm just going to speak from real experience that I had to navigate that. Of course, I'm getting up and I'm speaking it in all hands for 1,000 people. To your point, yes, I need to be crystal clear about the direction we're going in, the strategy, the context in which we're operating. What I really believe is that leaders need to share as much information as they can to set the context. Why are we doing this? What's the world in which we're operating? What are the business conditions? So that everyone has that same context and background. And I think sometimes leaders are very careful in how they dole out information, and I think that doesn't serve them well. So I believe in as much transparency as we can share that, that's not confidential with our employees. And at the same time, realizing and being public about the fact that there may be things we haven't considered. Like I, as the leader of this group, have done my due diligence. I have met with a lot of people. I've gathered input, and this is the way we're going. And I think this is the way forward. And these are the goals, etc. And if there's something that doesn't make sense to you, if there's something that you're unclear on, then I want to hear about it. And to your point, as you said earlier, it's not a one-time thing. Like I can't just say that and people will believe it. It really is over time that I have heard feedback back from people. People have witnessed me getting a question, for example, in all hands and responding positively and openly to it. And then maybe the next person is going to ask that question and say, I think we're really missing something important here. And then if I, as the leader, respond with curiosity and interest, then this is going to be, sort of a virtuous circle of perpetuating this openness and ability to ask questions and push back. So I think it's about, it's not about, I wouldn't use the word directive. I think that's part of the problem about leaders is that traditionally they've been so directive. Do this, don't do this. I think it's more about sharing information, vision, strategy, goals, and letting people figure out their way forward in that by having enough context and information, as opposed to do this, don't do this.
That's one of the things I remember from my years as an opera director. I was one of the early women, so in America at least. And so I was always worried that I wouldn't be, I had to be better than everybody because I was representing all women. I don't know if anybody ever told me that. I just felt that. I mean, that's a social expectation, which may or may not be true, but in those days it was early. And also I'm an oldest child. So I think I know how it's all supposed to go. And if there's an opera that I've directed before, I actually have an opinion about every single note, how it's supposed to go. Learning to let go and let the performers to set up a structure and then let the performers work within that to to be inclusive, to bring what they had to do. And I was often working with international teams, so different people had different ideas of what should happen. I confess that was hard for me. That was a tough lesson to learn. In some ways, like my way is still right, but maybe I could let other people do it. I'm curious. We've gone off my whole list of questions, so I think we have to do a longer interview another time. But I want to ask you, what happens if you are in a team, and or maybe you're a leader, but the people above you are not being inclusive, are not giving space for you? Is there a way that one can manage up if you believe in inclusion and psychological safety, but perhaps your next manager does not? Let's see, I go back to Karolin now for this.
You're on mute, Karolin.
This is a question which we find very often out there, because this is a situation many leaders find themselves in, right? For them, they are convinced of psychological safety. They try to establish it in their team, in their environment, and still the leaders higher up in the hierarchy, they seem to play a different game. What can I do then? And of course, you can't change other people. You can't force other people to do something or to not to do something. What we find, and I think there are a lot of nuances. One nuance might be that we have to let go of things we can't control. We have to focus on what we can control. And when leaders start to play kind of this new game of psychological safety in their environment, in their teams, sometimes what is happening is that there is a ripple effect, that this new play kind of spreads throughout the organization, and suddenly something is possible with the leaders who seem to be not open to this new idea, which was not possible before. However, of course, there's no guarantee, and this could only be one aspect. But I know, Minette, we just had this discussion. Maybe you want to add a little bit.
No, I think you've said it. You've said it quite well, that you can only influence where you can influence, and you can try to manage up, but it doesn't always work if people are not willing to change. I think that what we have to focus on when, let's say we're in that middle layer of management, which is so common, squeezed between our own teams and maybe the executive staff. If the executive staff is not buying into these ideas of inclusion and psychological safety, we still have a huge impact on the people we work with. And we must not underestimate that, let's say I'm a director or a VP, the people who are in my organization are going to be appreciative that I am creating these conditions for the people in my organization to do great work, to speak up, to do experiments, even if the executive staff maybe doesn't embrace it. So don't underestimate the impact you can have on the people who report to you and on your colleagues. Like, how do you behave with your peers? How do you create a great environment? And maybe, as Karolin said, maybe the people above you will notice And maybe not. And even if they don't, you still can have a very positive impact. And I will say it can be very frustrating when you know, like you see the great impact these behaviors are having, and then your higher ups are not embracing them. And maybe they're even silencing you and making you feel bad. And then we all have to make that decision of like, is this an environment where I can continue to do good work and can continue to have a positive impact, or am I simply too frustrated? And that's, of course, a choice we all have to make.
Minette, I'm going to go back to you here and continue with you. You've got a new book coming out at the time that we are recording.
No, it's out. It's out.
So your new book is called The Boldly Inclusive Leader.
Yeah.
Which I'm going to have to do a separate episode just about
Yeah,
that.
I'd love
but
to.
Talk about the link between psychological safety and inclusion.
Yes, and they are, thanks for that question. They are completely linked. And in fact, I have a whole chapter in The Boldly Inclusive Leader on psychological safety. And this is my
Actually, let me
belief.
just pause you. Can you define inclusion for our audience in terms of how it relates to, let's start with inclusion and then talk about psychological safety. What's your definition?
So for me, in a work context, inclusion is that you, whoever you are, whatever your identity is, you feel that you are appreciated, you are seen and heard, and your voice is welcome in this organization, and that you are afforded the same opportunities as anyone else. That's my simple definition of inclusion. You feel that you are appreciated for who you are uniquely, and that there's nothing held against you for your identity as who you are. Why psychological safety and inclusion are intrinsically linked in my mind is that I believe that unless we have a foundation of psychological safety, where people do feel they can share their ideas, even if they differ from the majority, then we do not get to that feeling of inclusion where my voice is heard, I am welcome here, I am embraced for who I am uniquely. So I think in a way, it's sort of a chicken and egg thing. I think that we have to start with psychological safety. We build on that. We get to inclusion and belonging and all sorts of other good things. And I think when we don't start with psychological safety, we can often say like, be your authentic self. We hear that a lot, like show up as yourself at work. And people don't want to do that. They do not feel that it is safe. And they feel that they have to conform to the group norms and the dominant culture. And what we do is we mask who we are. We cover who we are to try to fit in. And then the organization does not benefit from having a diverse workforce because everyone's conforming and pretending to be someone they're not. So you don't get to show up as your authentic self. You don't get to bring your full self to work unless you feel it's safe to do so.
I absolutely understand that one. I want to ask you, Karolin, we're recording this in June of 2024, and you're just publishing the German version of psychological safety because you're based in Germany. You've both been working with global teams, but I'm really interested in the perspective of two different countries, two different societies. I do a lot of work, I'm married to a German, so I think a lot about that. Karolin, how does this show up in terms of inclusion and safety? Is it different when you're working with German teams?
Probably to really have a proper answer to this question, which I really think is extremely interesting, I would have to do more work with purely American clients, and probably so far for the clients I collaborated with Minette based in the US. I don't see any very systematic differences which really stick out. I think inclusion and the accent on inclusion is something which is more prominent and more important maybe in US-based companies. However, it's also very important in Germany, and I think on the rise. Inclusive leadership is also an important topic, and I think in Germany, the large corporations, they become so much more international that you don't really see a huge difference anymore. So
Mm-hmm.
I have a little bit a hard time answering this question, and maybe, I don't know, maybe Minette, if Minette would do some work for kind of German clients, maybe you would detect subtle differences. I don't know.
Have you
We're-
worked with clients in India or Asia? And
That's what I was just,
or Africa, yes, other
that's what I was
continents.
just going to say. I have worked with clients in both Europe and Asia, not so much in Africa yet, but the bigger differences I see are with Asian culture than with, because really when you look at what at least Western European culture in Germany and the US, our cultures, yes, we communicate differently, but they are closer together when you look at like different scales of cultural communication and directness versus indirectness. When you work with Asian cultures, this is where actually it's quite challenging to talk about psychological safety in cultures that are traditionally hierarchical. And here's an example. I was working with a client who is a leader. He was working with a global group, but he's in India. He's Indian, based in India. His team's all in India. And when we were talking about this idea of being able to challenge the leader and offer a dissenting viewpoint, he said, Minette, this is really hard in India and in our culture. He said, I cannot even get my team members to call me by my first name. They only call me Mr. Because there's the age, there's definitely this respect for age, respect for hierarchy. And so how can I start to get them to be willing to really challenge my thinking? It's very, very hard in my culture. So this is, I mean, I'm really glad you asked the question. I wish that there were more research about this. I can't find research about psychological safety across different cultures. And I think this is a great area to explore. Because I think we all have this human need, no matter where we are in the world, but it plays out very differently depending on our traditional cultures, communication styles, and ways of working. So it's a really interesting question, and I'm not an expert in it.
Okay, there's certainly, if anybody's listening and hears this and wants to send information, please contact me, because this is something that I'm curious about. As I said, I've lived and worked internationally since I was 17 years old. And in opera, one of the reasons why I loved working in opera was working with international teams. And it was mostly a European viewpoint, looking at people who were mostly trained in Western European schools, US and Western Europe, and then adapting. If you had a Russian singer, if you had a Korean singer, if you had a Chinese singer, how you adapt to, how you reach them on a level that they can that they will take it in and relate. I want to say one more important topic before I let you go is, Karolin, you said at one point, if you want to get superior results, you have to let go of pushing for the results and instead prioritize the human side. One of my questions, because I spend so much time in the diversity and inclusion space, and my work is all about gender equity, part of me says, why is this so hard? Why are we still talking about prioritizing people before we prioritize the results, the money, basically? Why is it that, well, let's go there and I will ask further questions. So let's.
Yeah. I think it's so hard because it's not our nature, it's not our automatism. And I just had a little bit unfriendly discussion with the client, and that's what we always experience. When there's pressure, when there is pressure, then suddenly people forget all the nice stuff and suddenly kind of go to the seemingly safe side of pushing, of being more directive and not less directive. And we talked about letting go earlier. And if you increase the pressure, letting go is even harder to do. Letting go in good times is still hard and not easy, and something we need to deliberately do. However, it is a little bit more easy than compared to a situation where you are under severe pressure, for example, from above, because you have to deliver results and so on and so on. The bottom line is not where it should be and so on. So that's what I experience with all my clients. When you increase pressure, people default to the old automatism of more control, being more directive, forgetting the human side, not having time for checking in with the other human being, and go more to the pushing side. And this is setting you up for not having success.
So this is, we've certainly had in America since the 1980s, when the priorities changed to shareholders keeping the stock price high rather than the people who actually work in the organization. There's a lot of talk about empathy and treating people like human beings and not as just units. If you're a manager or a vice president or a director, and you are squeezed between, say, the private equity firm that owns your company and all they want is cash and stock price, and your desire to help your team, how do you strike that balance? How do we find a way of balancing both needs? Minette, let's ask you.
Here again, don't have an easy answer. I'm sorry.
That's all right. Do you want me to go, Elizabeth?
Go, Minette. Yes.
Okay.
And if we don't have an answer, then
I do.
We'll circle. Okay, good. Because otherwise, I'm going to come back to this and do another episode.
Oh, no. I actually think this is such an important topic. And when Karolin was talking about the pressures, I was really going to where you were just about to go, Elizabeth, about working for, I was working for a publicly traded company, right? And so it's all about shareholder. It's all about those quarterly returns. It's not even always long-term. It's a very short-term. So what are we going to report this quarter? My feeling about it, and having been in leadership position, is that yes, you are squeezed between the expectations of the street or your private equity or whatever it is, and the fact that who is getting this work done? It's the people who work with you and for you. And so I always felt that no matter how much pressure I was under as a leader, and I think we have to remember this, we don't want to just push that down to our employees, because we know what's going to happen if we are command and control. If we are micromanaging, they're going to be demotivated. They're not going to do great work. And so I think our job as leaders is to, in some ways, shield our teams from those pressures, those economic pressures and external pressures, and instead clear the way for them to continue to do great work. And that, I think, is the most important job of the leader, especially in these conditions, these market conditions. Is like, you don't have to expose them to all the pressures. You may be handling a lot of it, and you may need to have someone you can talk to about the pressures you're under. But what you want to do is still continue to create healthy conditions for your teams to do good work and experiment and learn from mistakes, and knowing that maybe we won't do all of the pet projects we were working on. We may need to narrow our focus, and this is the clear goal for the quarter. But in that, we are not going to go into micromanagement and directiveness, because what's going to happen is we're going to burn out our employees, and they're not going to be able to deliver. And that's so much what we see today with the fact that people are truly experiencing mental health issues and burnout. I think the empathy, what's really interesting, tomorrow's June 11th, the State of Workplace Empathy report is coming out tomorrow as we're recording this. So by the time it's released, it will be the 9th report that's come out from the workplace. It's from Business Solver. It's called the State of Workplace Empathy. And it's a fascinating study about, it studies, it interviewed CEOs, employees, HR people across the world. And empathy is incredibly important for successful businesses, and there's really an issue with it today. So I encourage people to get a hold of that report, and leaders to digest some of that about how we need to show up with empathy for our employees, because they're in a bad state.
Yes, well, and it's also financially rewarding, because it's so much easier to treat your people well and keep employees rather than having them get fed up and leave. It's when someone leaves, that's expensive for the company, and it's expensive for it's expensive for the employee who leaves. So keep your people happy. One other point for those of you who are listening is in America, we have a lot of pushback against diversity, equity, and inclusion from people who are nervous, and investors are nervous because of all sorts of political things that are happening. Don't forget, if you're in a position, you've got this thing, is that your team will help you produce great results. So even though your company may be pressured into eliminating the DEI department, that's just going to mean that the diverse employees you have are going to be angry. So even if you don't have a DEI important, you can do your best to work with the people that you work most closely with to say, we still believe in this. My team believes in this. So it was a bit of that's one of the things that's been bothering me a lot. So Minette Norman and Karolin Helbig, thank you so very much for joining us. I have about a page and a half of questions I still want to ask you. What I'd like to do is leave our listeners with, Minette, let's start with you. If somebody's listening and says, oh, they're speaking my language, I need help, what's one thing you could start with today? What's one action? And then Karolin, I'll ask you the next one.
I think one of the most powerful actions we can all do today is to pay attention to how we're listening to others and to truly slow down, not try to put our response forward, just listen. Listen with an open mind and an open heart, especially to the people you don't agree with.
Okay. Karolin, one thing you could do today.
I'd love to offer as a practice something what Minette did when she replied to one of your early questions, Elizabeth. She shifted from yes, but to yes, and. And this is such a powerful move. What happens if you say yes, but, as we habitually always do, you kind of diminish and turn away what the other person said. However, it's much more proactive, much more appreciative if you say, okay, yes, and it's really a great and easy tool. I encourage everyone to try this, and it can be applied in private life too.
Oh, wonderful. So Karolin Helbig and Minette Norman, thank you so much for being on Speakers Who Get Results. This is a very special episode. So our wonderful listeners and watchers, if you enjoyed this, please tell your friends, subscribe to us on YouTube, subscribe to the podcast wherever you're listening to it, and especially leave us a good review on Apple Podcasts. That's the one that matters, and that will bring us more people to listen to wonderful guests like Karolin Helbig and Minette Norman. This has been Speakers Who Get Results. I'm Elizabeth Bachman. I'll see you on the next one.
We have just concluded another great episode of Speakers Who Get Results with your host, Elizabeth Bachman. If you got value from today's episode, please feel free to share us with your friends and colleagues. You may also visit elizabethbachman.com for additional resources. Be sure to tune in every week for new episodes, and thanks for tuning in.